Jordan Ditloff is a libertarian advocate for capitalism and civil liberties, free speech, free humans and free money. I love that bit. Jordan, thanks for joining us again. Hopefully you won't
Thank you. It was actually great seeing Peter on just before talking about net zero. And what prevented me from continuing to speak to you yesterday was a sudden power outage, which I'm sure we can come to expect much more of in Victoria. So I was panicked messaging your producer saying, the power's out in Victoria. That's probably...
You wouldn't read about it, though, would you? You wouldn't read about it. I'm just thinking... This, again, I'm looking at this report from Channel 7, and we played a Channel 7 report before talking about the new scare tactics and this terrible... I didn't know we had $70 million to spend. The last I checked, I thought we were $155 billion in debt in Victoria, but, I suppose what's another $70 million? Now, you worry too much, mate. Just don't worry.
Just lay back and think of England. Just let it happen.
That's right. But that's what they're doing. They don't care. I mean, if you look at France at the moment is, and parts of Europe and the UK to follow fairly shortly, we spent too much. How are we going to stop it? Don't spend. Oh, no, we can't.
Print some more money, I suppose. That's probably the expectation. But, no, look, it certainly is, beyond absurd in terms of priorities, but also I think it's quite dystopian and Orwellian to be talking about truth-telling in schools that we're going to be having. We've already got a respectful relationships curriculum from daycare upwards, which is teaching kids about everything except parents and family and other similar values, and all about, things that really kids shouldn't be worrying about. And on top of that, added to the anxiety of trans issues, net zero, we're going to add truth-telling and cultural shaming to that curriculum. So it's a healthy brew, and we wonder why kids' mental health is steadily declining.
Isn't it interesting that government talks about truth-telling and then they bang it on about this misinformation that people on the internet, for example, are reading and hearing and seeing. And really, it's the state government or the government, whether it's federal or state or even local to that matter, they're the ones that are creating this dialogue of misinformation.
Well, Mike, it's rules for thee, but not for me. And what the government also likes to talk a lot about in Victoria is consent, except, of course, when it comes to, as Opposition Leader Brad Batten rightly said, the consent of the Victorian people. The voice referendum couldn't have been clearer, and many people were shocked that even Victoria, which is considered to be obviously a socialist hellscape by the majority of the country, quite convincingly voted no at the referendum. And yet that very clear message was completely ignored. And in fact, I think it actually spurred the Allen government on to even more urgent negotiations for a state treaty. It's almost like they want to lock in something ahead of the election next year, that an opposition going to the election would be very hard pressed to say they were going to repeal. And I think that's the kind of cynical politics we've come to expect in Victoria. But this statewide treaty bill does much more than simply embed propaganda in our schools. It's also creating an Indigenous infrastructure fund, which I think is, again, very concerning, and I can see that becoming a source of significant rorting and misuse of public funds. We've recently had a series of court cases, some of which are still ongoing, where Aboriginal elders or people involved in traditional owners corporations have been found to have engaged in misconduct. And I think that just as a right-thinking citizen, as someone who has legal training and a keen interest in administrative law, that old saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and lack of transparency and accountability does much the same thing. And I think you've got a witch's brew of access to a seemingly endless stream of funds, significant powers and oversight within those areas, and a seemingly unlimited remit when it comes to anything that might be relating to Indigenous peoples. And the bill makes a big deal, and Jacinta Allen's made a big deal about saying, the powers of the Gallenwall, the new not voice, I suppose you could call it, but the new body, they're saying these powers won't be coercive, but then there's a requirement for the Parliament to consult. And what you and I both know, and I think all of your listeners and viewers would readily imagine, is that it doesn't need to be legally coercive or binding for there to be an incredibly strong moral and sort of soft pressure on governments to pay very close attention, indeed, if not actually comply or follow what a Indigenous Parliament type body would request. You can't really imagine in the political climate in Victoria, any politician having the courage to sort of stare down requests or demands by the governing world body. So I think that's quite concerning. And I think also very concerning that I was midway through explaining yesterday is that this body, as the People's Assembly that it replaces, has a combination of directly elected seats, which is democratic and so forth, although they also get to determine the way those elections are carried out, the rules that apply, who can vote in them. So you've got this kind of almost super elite of Indigenous lawmakers essentially determining who can vote and participate and how. But then you've also got these reserved seats, which look for all the world similar to the UK House of Lords, where you've got this kind of hereditary peerage or place-based entitlement to this body. And it's, I think, very undemocratic and very backwards when it comes to that you could have these reserved seats that go to these Aboriginal land corporations or traditional owners groups.
I think you did right too. It also it's going to make it very hard for those in the land. Farmers are going to find this extremely difficult. Councils, how do they get around it? Because you see in Queensland, Redlands Council is having a terrible time at the moment. Federal governments, I think, has financed the Indigenous people, or the group there, 7.4 or 7.2 million, and the Redlands Council has got to find the money themselves, which is also, at the end of the day, the ratepayers have got to pay for it. And here's to say that, they will probably lose. Tell me this, and we're talking about farming, and we're talking about all sorts of things, talking about land, but the actual landscape for, say, someone on the land, you got the renewables, you got this climate crap that came out yesterday, you've got the treaties. It's going to make farming extremely difficult, isn't it?
Well, exactly. You've got this kind of, again, this almost, you couldn't dream up a more adverse landscape for farming and landowners in the country if you tried. And my parents are on 20 acres. They've got a little hobby farm. So I grew up surrounded by big farms south of Ballarat in Victoria. Mm-hmm. And, you've got the deck stacked against you as it is. If you're still in farming, you've hung out there tough. And a lot of times your kids aren't necessarily going to take over the farm. You've got succession planning issues. You've got a lot of things to contend with already. And then you've got red tape, green tape, and now black tape, potentially overlaying and impacting your ability to develop and use land, your ability to essentially try to struggle against all the odds. And while this statewide treaty bill doesn't impact existing property rights or native title directly, you can see it's absolutely going to provide an impetus for a lot of other changes in keeping with the spirit of that idea. And I think in Victoria, the problem you're more likely to have than councils fighting against it is probably councils going above and beyond what's required under legislation, strictly speaking. I can see a world where councils in Victoria who seem eager to make every issue a local issue, from Palestine to climate change and many other issues that I think are vastly outside the remit of local government. You've got this kind of almost delight in trying to seek out new things to be responsible for.
Jacinta Allen, she's from the bush. And I'm really surprised that that she has this attitude, although she hasn't got much of a say, really. It's what they say.
Well, she might be from Bendigo, but she's never worked for anything other than the government in her entire life. She's somebody who, and to be honest, the modern Liberal Party are often not that much better. You've got a political class now who really don't have any sense of what it means to be someone who's responsible for wages, for taxes, for all these things. You've got people and livelihoods, your own families, of course, but also employees and things depending on you. And I think that we're just paying the wages now of a political class who have never been more detached or removed from the struggles of the everyday person. Okay,
what happens, for example, in Victoria, what happens now? What's the next step from the government? Do they move? They'll obviously move forward with this. When will this all be, signed off, cross the T's, dot the I's?
Well, that's a very good question, because what this bill also makes explicit in its wording is that treaty is an ongoing process. So actually, the real answer to your question is never, by design. The treaty process is ongoing. The handover and creation of new powers and rights is explicitly ongoing. It's in the bill. It's in the explanatory memorandum. This is a process that I think this represents the speed hump, the biggest sort of hurdle. And then once this framework is in place, you'll have a steady but ongoing transfer of powers that I think will be much less heralded and that the average person will be much less aware of and able to actually object to. The Liberals are in a position where they, and I say this carefully, sometimes the Liberals' willingness to oppose things depends a lot on whether or not they could actually make a difference to it anyway. So in this instance, they've got nothing to lose by saying they're against it because there's nothing they can do. So they can vote no without consequence. But if they did have the numbers, I think we would be seeing a very different discussion and a very interesting attempt to, contort themselves into all sorts of pretzel shapes, because I'm not certain that the modern Liberal Party would object to it if they were in a position to actually impact the outcome. But I think that the real answer is we need to make sure that we're supporting parties and candidates who will continue to oppose these things, will continue to fight for repeal, who are going to represent local people as well. I think that's really important. And I think that there'll also be a lot of responsibility fall on the legal profession and on advocacy groups who will seek to hold these Aboriginal landowners, corporations, and this Gallen Well body to account. Because I think that's the real, you don't want Dracula in charge of the blood bank without anybody being able to see what's going on. All we have to do is look at the E-Safety Commission or the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, all these sorts of bodies. The worst work gets done in darkness. And I think that there will be a real responsibility on those who are able to do so to try to, monitor and audit these bodies externally, because I have no confidence that that'll happen from within the system.
Yeah, we need to keep this conversation going next time, because there's so many other things to talk about, and it's just if you are a farmer or you're a grower, you're going to find some of this is just going to obliterate. Jordan, if somebody wants to find out more about you, how do they do that?
So on all social media channels, my handle is at Ditloff4cents, the number 4. Or you can find me on my website, which is www.jordanditloff.com.au.
Jordan, glad you were powered and blackout this time. And great chatting with you too. Jordan Ditloff, a libertarian advocate for capitalism and civil liberties, free speech, free humans, free money. And he knows exactly where this treaty is going to take Victoria, and we will continue this discussion very soon. This is The World Today, and of course, the Country Telegraph.